And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with the Game Boy Geek.
Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here. Today, we are going to be turning back time. That's right, we're going to be doing some time travel here. We're going to be going back in time to try to save the day. Because each day, a possible tragedy is going to happen. But we're going to go backwards in time, trying to learn from that, try not to let it happen again. We're talking about a deductive game here called Tragedy Looper from Z-Man Games. It's from 2 to 4 players. It is a very unique concept. Let's check it out. In Tragedy Looper, it's a one versus many game where one player is going to be the mastermind. He's going to have a mastermind's handbook, and from this handbook there are up to 10 pre-made scripts, or mini-games if you will, or games, that they will choose to use for this game. There's also a lot of ways to create your own scripts, and it has a guide to do so in the back of this. So the mastermind will be playing against the protagonists, and the protagonists can be up to 3 players. It could be as little as one. One player can play all 3 protagonists, or up to 3 players can each play their own protagonist role, and these people are going against the single mastermind. Now the mastermind will give this card to the protagonist, and they will know the name of the tragedy loop that's going through. We'll know the number of loops. In this case, let's just say 3. That's how many overall chances you have to fix the tragedy from happening. And how many days are 4? So there's 4 rounds. In this case, we know on day 2 and day 3 there's going to be some evil events that happen. There's going to be a murder on day 2 and a suicide possibly on day 3. So there's a tracker over here that keeps track of days, and again, days are just rounds of playing cards, and we're going to go up to 4 rounds here. On day 2 and 3 there's going to be some incidents that we just talked about, and at the end of the day 4, will be the end of the loop. This specific scenario has 3 loops. So what's trying to happen is the mastermind is trying to make something evil or bad happen within each loop. If he does so, essentially the game resets, and the protagonists have learned something about that, and they're going to try to stop that from happening, and they're trying to get to the end. If they can get through any one of the 3 loops without having a key person get killed or having something really bad happen, they win the game. But they're trying to learn that through the different loops. Now there's 4 locations in the game. There's many different characters that can be in a set, but each scenario or script will have a certain amount of characters that come out, and they start in their own default location. And so we have the school, the shrine, the hospital, the city. We have the police officer, the office worker, the doctor, the shrine, maiden, the boy student, the girl student. So that starts this scenario. Now this sheet is given to all the protagonists. Essentially what's going to happen is some interesting or bad things are going to happen, and based upon those, the protagonists are trying to figure out what roles are actually in this script. And based upon that, they can try to figure out what main plot and subplot is going on here. For example, we see a murder plan, and the murder plan has a key person, a killer, and a brain. Whereas the place to protect has a key person and a cultist. So if we find out that there is a key person, for example, we know it's one of these 2 main plots. And also the subplots here, if there's a serial killer involved, then we know it has to only be the Shadow of the Ripper subplot, which means we know that this plot only has a serial killer and a conspiracy theorist because it has ones near there. So you're trying to deduce what roles are there by what happens, and based upon knowing those roles, trying to figure out the plot so you can figure out what other roles are there. Oof, hard to keep track of, right? Well, here's all these roles. There's different roles: key person, killer, brain, cultist, conspiracy theorist, serial killer. All the different ones that make up this that I was showing you here, it shows them here. It also shows what certain things that those different roles can do. So when you see something bad happen, that's when you know, oh, okay, that person must be this role, which means that role must be in this plot, which means we must be in that plot. And that's sort of how the deduction, at a step back and a glance at this game, how things work. So let's talk about how a round or a day works. We have a turn summary here on the board. Morning happens, in some scripts something will happen. In this case, nothing does. Then we do playing cards. The mastermind's going to play some cards, then the protagonists are going to play some cards face down. Now the protagonist has a hand of cards, and these cards can do different things, like they can add a certain level of paranoia, or they can take down paranoia. They can add intrigue. They can move characters a certain way. They can, forbid paranoia, forbid goodwill from the other team, do different things. And they're going to be placing these cards down. They're going to place 3 cards face down, and these cards can be on either a person or a location. After that, the protagonists get to put their 3 cards face down. Now, each of these 3 protagonists, one of them is the leader, they get to go first. There's no talking also, for the most part. You can play a variant where you can talk, but for the base game, you don't talk between there. And each of these 3 players actually have the same cards, and they also have paranoia or movement, goodwill. We'll talk about what some of these things do, but they all have the same 3 sets of cards. So each of these players is going to place 1 card on a player location, and once all 3 of these have placed 1 card, that ends the play card phase. Now, these people can play cards on the same spot as the mastermind, but they can't play on the same spot that somebody else, one of their other teammates, played. So maybe the second player plays a card here, and the third player plays one there. Now, we would flip these cards over, and we would sort of resolve them. Now, so what we do is we look at this, and this was a location. The only type of card you can play on a location is an intrigue card, and this was supposed to be an intrigue. And if you get enough intrigue on a location, bad things can possibly happen. But since this person plays forbid intrigue, this canceled it out. So essentially, this card get canceled out, and these people did good by canceling that out, maybe. Now this one has movement. And this one said paranoia. Let's look at that. Now, each of these cards have a certain amount of levels of paranoia at the top. This one has 2. If the paranoia ever gets to a 2, that could trigger something bad from happening. If you remember, in this scenario, on day 3, there's going to be a suicide, and the incident suicide says the culprit dies. Well, this will happen if whoever the culprit is of the suicide, that we don't know, but the mastermind does, has full of their paranoia. That will happen. So you're trying to keep paranoia off people, because that typically means the mastermind is trying to make something happen that you don't know that's bad and would end the loop. There's also cards, some of these cards you'll notice have a little blue loop marker on them, like these 2. This means they can only use once per loop. So after these cards are played, they're thrown out of the game until you start a new loop, which means they won't be in your hand for the rest of the days. This loop has 4 days in it. Goodwill is something cool that can happen. Goodwill are essentially these heart tokens, and this allows me to put 2 goodwill. Now again, this person would have only played 1 card, but I'm just showing you what goodwill kind of does. Let's say instead of the -1 paranoia, they would have put the goodwill +2. Now this -1 paranoia didn't really do anything, because I was thinking that the mastermind may have been trying to put some paranoia on this player, and so I was trying to take it off. But in this case, let's just say I did some goodwill, and I get to put 2 of these goodwill counters. When these goodwill counters match up to a certain level on these cards, they get to activate a special ability. For example, once this character gets 3 goodwill, if in the shrine, remove 1 intrigue from the shrine. So some of them allow you to move intrigue, some of them allow you to move paranoia, some of them just do special things. And if you get more, you get an even stronger special ability. But in this case, let's just say, yeah, we added the 2 goodwill in this case, and the mastermind moved it. Now this is interesting, because the movement has the mastermind moving this player left or right. So we move them this way, like this. Now, we've moved them over here. Now, if for some reason the other people had played a left-right card as well, it says if there is 2 left-rights, it still goes left-right, so it doesn't do anything. But if one of them played like a movement up and down card, along with the left and right movement, you'd say a left plus an up and down, well, it has to move diagonally. So it wouldn't have been able to move where they want it to, it would have had to have moved to a diagonal place. So you can counter movements, and you can screw up the movement by playing movement cards as well. Now you'll notice this Shrine Maiden, every card has the 4 quadrants, the 4 different boards. And this one says the bottom left quadrant is an X, meaning she can't move there. So in that last case, when this player, if they were to move down to this last quadrant, she can't move there, so she would have just stayed. Now this was a paranoia 1. The protagonist tried to forbid movement. They thought maybe this player was going to move, so they didn't do anything. But it was a once per loop, so it comes out of the game, and this player gets 1 paranoia, and that's that. So that was revealed. Now after these cards were resolved, the mastermind has some abilities that he might want to trigger. He could possibly do it, and this is actually when those goodwill abilities would happen. For example, if there was a conspiracy theorist in this optional mastermind ability, I could place 1 paranoia on a character in this location, whoever's there with the conspiracy theorist. So there's different mastermind abilities that they might want to do. Maybe this turn he doesn't. Now, some of these players that we talked about goodwill, some of the optional things allow you to forbid goodwill and not even get them on them, so they can't activate their good powers. So let's say none of those happen, and we go to incidents. Today, no incident happens because the incidents only happen on day 2 and 3 in this scenario. We're in day 1, and then nighttime, where sometimes in some scripts things would happen here. So we would change the leader, and we would end the day. At this point, the leader would be the next player, and they'd show what order they play cards next round. So at this point, the mastermind might say, "I'm sorry, but the Shrine Man has died and you've lost." Now, only one character got moved, so you're trying to deduce, well, what roles are here? Okay, we've lost. We get to loop back and start over, but what did we learn? And you look through these roles and you say, serial killer, mandatory, day end, exactly one other character in this location, that character dies. You say, okay, there was only, this character moved, there's only one other character location, this one died, this one must be the serial killer, the doctor. Okay, so I know that there's a serial killer, which means the only subplot a serial killer could be in is Shout of the Ripper, which means there must be a conspiracy theorist here. Okay, so you look over here and say conspiracy theorist, optional, mastermind ability, place 1 paranoia on a character. So we know that he might have an ability that he's going to be able to use that's going to place paranoia there in a future round. But now we know a little bit about what subplot and plot we're in. So we move this loop down. We have 2 loops left to try to figure this out and get through without getting killed. And we start back at day 1 again. So we would go through again, we would reset the board completely. We'd go through, and in that time, we played cards to make sure that that person didn't get killed. Then we get to day 2, we play all those more cards again. And we know that at the end of day 2, a murder is going to happen. And we know a murder happens if only one other character is in the culprit's location. So we're trying to make sure there's not just one person with one other person in any location if we can help it, to try to get through that day. If not, might be the murder, we might die again and start a loop over. And then in day 3, we know a suicide might happen, since it shows us here what day something might happen. And we know that we just don't want them to be full of paranoia, because if they do by this day, they will commit suicide, die, we would lose again. You can't, in this case, we get 3 loops. If we lose through all 3, in the beginner first steps section, which is like the first couple of ones. By the way, I'm not actually playing this exactly to the T of the script. I've actually screwed around with some of what I'm doing here so that it's not a spoiler. So in general, that's what you're trying to do, is you're playing cards, you're trying to figure out what the mastermind's doing, you're probably dying, and the loop's probably going down, and you're trying to learn information to not die that same way, or not have that bad thing happen that same way, and then you're trying to get through the day 4, and if you get all the way through day 4 in any loop without dying, you have 1. Now, if you get down through all your loops and you die even in the last loop, in the very first steps, which is, they have a couple of scenarios that have that, you can't guess. But when you're playing the real full game, which is the basic strategy, there's 8 of these types of scripts in there, and of course, like I said, you can create your own. In this level base game, at the end of the final loop, if you lose again, you get to guess all the rolls, and if you guess them right, you still can win. Well, there's Strategy Looper. Listen, I love deduction games. They're my favorite genre of games. How does this game fit into that genre? It's interesting because this was a lot of people's pick, including mine, was like in the top tier of most innovative game of the year last year, because it's just so foreign. And teaching the game can be quite a little bit of a bear because the concepts are so foreign to normal gameplay. It takes a while for people to get it clicked. And you're trying to figure out, okay, well, that happened to me, so I can deduce that this role is definitely here, which means it's this subplot, which means there's got to be these other roles, and then you're looking at those roles, and you're trying to not only stop what just happened last day, but possibly trying to stop what this role might be doing. And if it's this role, then the main plot's one of these two, and there is a lot of deduction there, and I like the deduction side of it. But in general, I didn't like the game because a couple of things. I feel like there's a lot of time. I mean, between the 2 rulebooks, there's 88 pages. Granted, big text, small pages, there's still 88 pages of stuff there to learn because the concepts are so new. And mechanically, it's a pretty simple game. Certain things happen, you're playing cards, you're revealing, certain things are happening. It's pretty simple mechanically. It's just conceptually, it's very hard to kind of teach people this game. So the reason why this game's not one I'm going to hold on to is because the amount of time and effort that it takes me to teach someone the game, by the time they know it well enough to get enjoyment, we're probably 3 plays in to the point where we're getting real deep, right? And that's a lot of time to spend on the front end to get the enjoyment on the back end. And although it is enjoyable, it's not worth, for me, the amount of time that it takes. And for me, I play games with a lot of different groups. If I don't play this game with the same group, I've got to start over again. And even once these people start understanding the concepts, I know the scenarios well, and as the mastermind, I'm just going to blow them away. And what fun is that, right? So who I think this game is for is people that like deduction, people that like something different, people that don't mind spending a lot of time on the front end to learn the game to get some back-end rewards on the end, but also who play with the same people a lot. Because I think that's the one person who's really going to like this game. The deeper strategies, I can see people totally getting into creating your own scenarios, creating your own scripts, people really getting deep into this game with the same people, the same group over and over. And I think for them, this game is going to be a very big hit. But outside of that group, I just don't see these days with how many games are coming out and how many little times people play a game before they buy a new one, thousands of games coming out, I just don't see people putting in the time to be able to reap the rewards of this game. And that's kind of how I felt with this one. And that's Tragedy Looper.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at DicetowerNetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.